on. The reason I do it like this is being as a, I'll proudly admit it, ADHD type A adult, nothing I hate more than PowerPoint. And I'm good at it, but I hate it. The thing is, that's a great backdrop, but you need the toys. And I'd say anybody who's in the back, I would just come up a little closer. If you're having trouble reading, come up closer, because we're going to, just a handful of things, but we're going to kind of pass some things around so you can see them and feel them and all that. But I do encourage you to next stop, blast off up to Sam's house, and we have the full display. It's 18 feet long display of materials, and it's real artifacts, all from here, and reproductions. Any questions before we start? Because I know we got an intro to do, and I've got a strict 45-minute limit, so I get it. Any questions? Any thoughts? I was part of the digs with the Indian River Anthropological Society up there. We did 265 test holes, meter square, meter deep. What is interesting about that site, really unusual about that site, was over 90% of that 265 holes we found artifacts in. And so you go 10 meters, 1 meter hole, 10 meters, so that went well out, many acres, and there was pottery. It wasn't any big pottery, it was smaller. But you had the ceramic sherds, but we had some other features that were very interesting that told us what was going on there. One of them was you would find concretions of shells. So shells that had been burned, boiled, burned, thrown in the fireplace, whatever. And then when you burn and crush them, they become concrete. And so concrete, we got to stay on time. Be quiet. Anyway, these concretions are all of King's Crown conchs. Well, they're edible. King's Crown conchs, the shells, everybody knows them, little snail. It's kind of like a booger in a shell. It's pretty disgusting. And it's on the lower end, but the Indians ate them regularly. But what's interesting is that's all it was. There was no other mix. And because those are so easy to gather up, we believe that it was a seasonal gathering point. On the south side of the property is a burial mound. And we think this was a seasonal ceremonial spot where they would come in, and we found other things that appeared to be burned, crushed acorns and the King's Crown conchs. So those would be the seasonal foods at the time they were there. And by the numbers that we found, dozens, clearly they were there many times and probably in pretty good numbers. So that's the Sam's property. Here, right out there in the dredging lane, there is Indian mound about 200 yards from us?
Yes.
About that. About 200 yards from right here. And some other really cool stuff.
Well, definitely, Mr. David, it's a lot of information in that mind, and definitely we grow so much with his presentations, and I can talk about that because from the moment I met him, he have a lot of information to share. Our presenter today is Mr. David McDonald, and he brings a resume about every bit as impressive as his artifacts. He said toys, right?
I said
toys. Let me tell you, the time he was here doing the last presentation, and when I see all that toys, I said, wow, that's a good collection. That's a very good collection. By the way, you don't have it today, right?
It's at the Sam's house.
On
display right
in the
now.
Sam's house. Okay. Dave was born and raised in Central Florida. He's a retired lieutenant colonel in the U.S. Army Reserve, 82nd Airborne, the 24th and 25th Infantry, in the U.S. Army Reserve Command, and other units. He was an attack helicopter pilot, a field artillery officer, and a force management program manager. Honestly and by heart, thank you for your service, Mr. David. Thank you for your service. After 22 years of active duty, he was Port Security Supervisor for the Brevard Sheriff's Office until 2022. He's been a volunteer guest speaker at over 400 Brevard School classes, and he is a member and former president of Indian River Anthropological Society. By the way, I didn't present myself. I'm Father Lopez, from the rector here in St. Luke's. And at this moment, let us please welcome Mr. David McDonald.
Thank you. Thank you, Father. All right, let's get down to it. What we have up here, Ais Indians. Let's start off with the first piece of this so that you know, and it depends on how you look at things and how you pronounce that. You see AIS. That was not the original spelling. It was AYS by the Spaniards, who were the first to hear and transliterate what they heard. Sound spell. AYS in Spanish has but one pronunciation. Ais. So some people say eyes, ice, there's a whole bunch of stuff. I say Ais because I know what the original writing was. The Indian River, its original name was Rio de Ais. What do you know? Guess who lived here? So we're talking the Indians who lived from North Brevard County line, basically based at the inlet, Mosquito Inlet, all the way down towards Hobie Sound, and you have different versions of the same culture. All right, let's go to the next one. Now, we have a mystery that we have to solve as we go through it, and that's the more fun part of this. It's grim, but it's fun. The Indians were here in thousands, and that's through prehistory. Then by 1763, there are none left. And they disappeared not for the reasons you think. And that's what we're going to go through, what happened, the dynamics that went on and destroyed all the Florida cultures. All right, this one is controversial in some ways. The original, the textbook answer is 13,500 years ago, Native Americans came wandering in, following herds of animals because they were hunter-gatherers. We now know that that time is probably 20,000 years or more. Some are asserting that it's 30,000. I would go over 20 for sure. We know from the footprints that are out at White Sands, New Mexico, that the Americas were occupied at least 22,500 years ago. And we can assume that that was not an isolated band. So I believe people were here 20,000 plus years ago. Okay, now one of the most interesting things, I got my lightsaber. Note how big the shoreline was for Florida. Climate change is not new. It's been going on forever. 12,000 years ago, we're coming out of an ice age. We're supposed to be warming. Just how much farther does it go before it starts going down? But our shoreline was way, way out there, way out there. So as a result, we don't have the evidence of many of those prehistory folks that were here because it's underwater. A couple of places have been found. I actually got to speak to a diver who found one approximately a half mile off the coast, right up here by Charlotte Harbor. Found an archaic village site that far, half mile off the shore, underwater. So life has changed a lot. Climate change has been going on for a while. Next one, please. Our first piece where we can pin something down, Brevard County, and say people were here, and what they were doing was Windover site, which is right up here off of the Highway 50 area. And if you didn't know that, that was the story in 1982, I believe it was, 82, 83, bulldozer going through, he's digging out of a swampy area and a skull rolls out. They stop everything and it takes a multi-years and they start examining the site. And what it is a rare place where the wetlands stayed wet the way they were 8,000 years ago. And that's the way they used to bury their dead. Was sometimes they're wrapped up, sometimes in cloth, and then they're staked down. Nobody knows exactly why. They think to keep the spirit there. We're not sure. The problem is we go, were those the people that were the ancestors of the Ais? We don't really know. We can guess that they were, but there's one weird thing about the Wendover people. I talked to Dr. Rachel Wentz, who did examinations, physical anthropologist, and she said they did isotope analysis of as much as they could do off of the bodies. Found that the isotope analysis says they don't come from here. They live well north of Orlando. Now, why would you trundle dead people all the way over here to bury them? Don't know. There's one of those mysteries. But there's other things we don't talk about. We'll go to the next slide. There were other sites. There was one by the Cocoa Baseball Stadium called the Gauthier site. And they were around the same time, also buried, but they were under muck. So we know that people were here 8,000 plus years ago, and they were here in numbers. The first thing that where we can identify and say people were definitely here, and we know that they were a specific cultural group, and it has to do with ceramics. And I have from the era up here in the upper left, and we'll pass this around if you want to take it around. I'd say please touch this. This is a kind of small tour de force of the ceramics. But about 4,000 years ago, fiber-tempered ceramics begin to show up. That's the first time we can say we know a people and we know a place because of the way they made the clay. Now, how you say, okay, clay is clay, so how are you doing that? There's a specific sponge spicule. It's this little piece of sponge animals that's mixed up as a tempering agent in the ceramics. Absolutely pinpoints a source for the clay. And when you see that clay on the beach, when you see that clay and those ceramic pieces all the way down South Brevard into Indian River County, you know, same culture. That's how we know, and that's why we take Orange Mound. And does anybody in here know where Orange Mound is? Nobody. All right, let me tell you. How many of you know where Hatbill Park is up northwest of Titusville? Okay, we have one. So you go way out, go on Highway 46. Go way out, look for Hatbill, and you go out and you go right to the St. Johns River, and that was one of their sites. They never stayed in the same place for too long, but that was an encampment or a town for over 4,000 years. And yes, you can actually, I have actually seen driving out there where they cut through a mound, I could see a human brow bone sticking out of a cut. And then there's pottery all over the place, just all over the place because there were thousands of Indians over thousands of years. All right, next one. Now, when we start to try to measure, because we are Americans, we need answers. We need the most, the least. We got to have the list. We got to go, all right, so how can we tell who was what and when? We know from the ceramics by 500 BCE, before Common Era, you can just use BC if you want, the Malabar culture, which the name changes, is, as we said, powerful subset. And you see that nice little checkerboarded area there. Malabar, part of the St. John's culture, but they eventually become the Ais. We have no idea what the Ais called themselves. We know what they said to the Spanish, and we don't know if that was a curse word that somebody took out of it or it was their name. We do not know. Name of a town. Eventually, as you see, the Ais becomes dominant. They control the Suruque to the north and the Heiaga to the south. As in, they can reach out and say, no, we want those people, bring them to us. And those chiefs in those other areas would do that. We know that from historical accounts. All right, so they controlled much of the East Coast, were powerful, and it's because they controlled the East Coast that gets them in trouble later on, not from their doing necessarily. By 1763, they're gone. You know it's bad when you start off and you don't even take your notes out, you just start running with it. All right, controversial stuff. I'll skirt it a bit. The ice were fierce and aggressive, hands down. Mean people, did bad things. I have many accounts. Some Europeans also claim they were cannibals. I'm going to deal with that. I'll just say this. We cannot dismiss it. The accusations came again and again, but we don't have a specific account of they hunted little Johnny down, they killed little Johnny, and they barbecued little Johnny. We're missing that piece. But we do have some scant other pieces that go, it's possible. And we have accounts of shipwrecked people who said they were cannibals. That's it. But they give no description. So we're not going to erase it. We're just going to leave the accusation stand because we don't have enough to erase it or confirm it. All right, next one. Let's talk about what they look like. This is time to embarrass everybody. Yay! That's the best part. Okay, so the average, let's see if I got any victims who want to do this with me. Stand in the aisle. I need a woman who's 5'2" and anyone who's 5'6". Somebody stand for just a minute. Just stand up right where you are. All right. The average Indian male was 5 feet 6 inches tall. That'd be the top of my ear. About right. Now, what's interesting is the average Native American here, Ais, was 1 inch taller on average than the average European. What does that say about diet? What does that say about lineage? I'm not really sure, but we know that they were healthy people. The average female was 5'2", which would be ish smaller than my wife. 5'2"? Well, come on up. You stand up here. The average height of a woman, 5'2". So you see, all right, you're looking back into history, you see a little bit, all right. Now, thank you very much. I'm not going to make you wear any costumes. Not yet. Not yet. So, all right, let's embarrass the men first. All right, the guys essentially went unclothed except for what I would call a Speedo. And the reason these aren't copied onto the slides is because these are copyrighted, and I got them from the artist. But any victim want to walk around with these so you see this? All right, so the men are wearing a Speedo, and it is made out of diverse colored fibers, and essentially it's an athletic supporter. That's it. They body paint. They do not tattoo. If you'll do that side for me. Oh, okay. These things get handed around so much there'll be nothing left of them. A good point, though. So they're going au natural except for the supporter. They got their Speedo on. If it's cold, because you would ask, yeah, we had some cold weather, they would just put an animal cloak over. So animal skin, that's it. You're running. No footwear, nothing like that. So we have a picture of Chief Cacique. This is from a description by Jonathan Dickinson, 1696, which is the only actual account we have in detail of sight, smell, sounds, colors. We'll do another one. Here's one of the high counselors. All right, I'm going to take both of those. Thank you. Now, let's talk about the details of their hair and all that. You see that the hair, they never cut their hair. It was worn up in a top knot. Normally had two bones through it. One that they looked like arrows or spear points, and they were long boned items up here. I don't have a headdress where I'd put it on because it would be cool. But anyway, they did. I didn't bring them with me. They used fish bladder or shark vertebra as their ear decorations. So you cut a hole, fish bladder. I found this out by accident, but playing with it one day, you could kind of squeeze that through. It will harden on its own, easy to paint. weighs about as much as a Dorito. But they would have a nice, that is very, very distinctive in all of theirs. So they also wore, sometimes they had necklaces and amulets, but we have the 2 spear points, bone pins through the hair, and they're large. My wife actually wears a bone pin like this sometimes. Thank you. Okay, so they never tattooed, they body painted. Red and black were their colors. Big surprise, because those are easy. Red ochre and black from many sources. Females, 5'2". Thank you for standing up. 5'2". They went naked but for a Spanish moss skirt. And what is interesting about that, and that was throughout Florida, Spanish moss, and you'd go, Spanish moss, oh my God, the bugs. No. You take Spanish moss off the trees, do not take it off the ground. And that's how you keep from getting bugs all over you. When you take it out of the tree, all you do is you can smoke it a little bit over a fire. It's fine. It's good. And it's soft and it's pleasant. I've made pillows out of it while camping many times. But, so they've got Spanish moss skirt. They would also wear sometimes decorations in the hair, but they would also wear different amulets of some kind, stone pendants, shell bead necklaces. All right, we've got to do the women artwork. We have that too. Because I have an adult crowd, I can finally show this one. Not in school anymore. No, it doesn't show anything, but yes. I was so happy. I've had this one stored away for years and I couldn't show it. I'd go into class and all the kids start snickering. So finally I can show it. And it's not that racy. But it's such a pretty one though, isn't it? You see, do it so there's no glare, right? I'll have to get the copyright for some time from now. A couple of interesting things, just nice facial things so we don't get in trouble with other issues. We have one, she's wearing an animal skin. I think she's Hayaga. She's got the decoration, the hair, with the pins and feathers. There's one very interesting thing in. Look close across her tummy and on her shins. And you'll see essentially the scar tattooing. Now, the way that's done is rather painful and unpleasant, as I guess all tattooing is painful and unpleasant, isn't it? I don't know, because I don't have one. But what they would do, and this is some cultures, we don't know about the Ais, but to do that, thank you. Let me borrow you for a minute. All right, so on flesh, if we wanted that to come out, you want the little muffin top scars, you got to do some unpleasant things. So you take that and you have to jab it in but you have to mix it up. For us, the older generation here, we have our old smallpox scars, remember? And you saw kids, adults that had kind of muffin top scars on there. It's the same way they used to give us those inoculations when we were kids. They made hash out of your arm and then smeared the medicine into it. Kids have no idea. But that's how you do it. So you would have to go around and mutilate the skin to get it to do that muffin top. Just one of those fun facts. You guys are so quiet. That's some heckling. All right. So we know. Never cut their hair. If they do painting, it's generally red and black. The guys wear the Speedo. Ladies wear the Spanish moss skirts. Because the Ais were hunter-gatherers, they didn't stay in any place very long. Because you think about what's happening as a hunter-gatherer. You have to collect what's in the area. As any hunter knows, the longer you stay in an area, the fewer animals you're going to find, right? Even if you don't kill any. Your smell, your presence chases them away. So each footprint of each place they go, they can't stay too long. They can collect shellfish and they can do fishing for quite a while, but eventually you need to move on. What I'm curious about is field sanitation, pooping habits and things like that. How did they do it? Nobody ever described it. I'm kind of curious how they kept their areas clean, or did they? They might not have. And we see generally seasonal movements between habitual sites. It's those habitual sites that let us find where they live. Because they're not always doing something different, we find the shell mounds. And we'll get to that in just a minute. All right, this next one. Typical house. I'm going to build this for you right in front of you. Would be a little over 1 man high. If you'll just hold that, or grab that stuff. You know how to do this. A little over 1 man high. So this would be a guy's head. They take saplings, bend them to the middle. They tie them off. Well, let's do the top first. If it's hot weather, then they'll just palmetto thatch the roof. She just learned this today. She's good. All right, that's it. That would be just breeze through. I need the sun off of me and the rain to hopefully flow away. Now, if it's cold, then you put side panels. That is a great question. They're running around in their tighty-whities. Would you do it? Apparently, they had an immunity because it didn't bother them, because we have shipwreck survivors who literally would bury themselves in sand up to their neck and cover their head in moss and leaves to get relief from the biting insects. And the Indians are standing there looking at them like, yo, dude, what's up? And that's in the account. We can assume there was some sort of immunity, probably diet, something else. Now, the Seminoles, when the Seminoles came to Florida, so all the Florida Indians disappeared, the Seminoles come in. What happens? What do the Seminoles wear? Are they running around their tighty-whities? No, they are not. They have long pants on, long shirts, high collars, and the early settlers said, I could smell them before I saw them because they smeared themselves in bear grease to relieve from. So the Indians who came from southwest Georgia and Alabama did not have the immunities that the Indians who lived here did, even after 50 years. So what's that answer? I don't know. I can't find anything about that. All right, so winter house. That's a great question. You got me off my track, but that's one of my issues that drive me crazy. I can't imagine running around without bug spray on me. Not happening. All right. That's winter house, and then if you've got to stop that, get this. And then they would put an animal skin over the door to kind of break the wind. And from the Jonathan Dickinson account, this was not effective. They froze. So, but this is what their houses were. But because you're moving all the time, are you building a big brick house? No, you're building a little shack and you're moving on. Shack and move on. And then if there's something left of the shack from a year ago, just fix it up and keep going. All right, next. Numbers. Maybe a couple of dozen, low hundreds at the most. Hunter-gatherers, they need a big hunting, fishing footprint. So you can't have large populations. The only place where that has happened was in southwest Florida with the Calusa. And their estuary places that they lived were so rich that they could have thousands in one big settlement. Ours could not do that. Next one. The Ais were primarily fishermen. We know this. We find out 84 to 85% of their food. And you say, how do you know that? Well, that's the key question. Perfect. Because we dig through their garbage pits. And if the FBI wants to know about things in your house, they take your garbage and they go through your garbage. We do the same thing for ancient peoples. We dig through, and I've been on several of these digs, and I've done one down in the Calusa territory, I've done it here, and we sift through. And what they do, the really smart guys, is they take out of a cubic area and say, okay, these shells all, we'll put those aside, that would generate X amount of food, and they do a volume. Then they look at the fish bones and go, how much food would that produce? And what they found was fish was the primary food by doing that. And I have some samples. I can get you to pass those back. This is literally out of Merritt Island garbage piles. You can look in there. They ate pufferfish. They ate shark. They ate all kinds of things. But this is a nice little sample of the food. This has been done this way to prevent children from destroying it. You're adults, so you can pick at it. It's okay. I'll start something in the back. But these are the samples you see. But we go through it down to, and I was, in one dig, y'all know what a periwinkle shell is, right? Smaller than that, about half the size. We were looking for those that were 1,000 years old, which gave us a specific species of fish, and we were counting them. And it was surprising. After 1,000 years, we were finding them in very acidic soil. Start this back here so you can see. So there's the real, right out of the mounds. Now, some of it's big and chunky. You'll see everything. There is nothing that they didn't eat. This is another reason why I won't cross cannibal off the list. If it didn't crawl away, swim away, fly away fast enough, they ate it. Period. So save the manatee? Yeah, save it for supper. And there was so much of that, but they ate pufferfish. They ate manatees. Name a bird, we'll find those bones. Name a fish, we'll find those bones. They ate anything. But fish was their primary, followed by shellfish. All right. I say hundreds of sites, there's thousands of sites. You all know it. Yes, ma'am. You're actually not supposed to do that. If it's on private property, if it's a burial mound, never, ever, ever. That's federal law. Private garbage mound, midden, on private property with the permission of the owner, that's when you do it, or if it's federal land. Other than that, you're not supposed to mess with any of it. Go to the next one. We just explained, that's what you see, just shells. It's not until you literally take it a fine sifter and go through it and collect all that and push it to the side that you discover fish was the primary food. Now, the other thing, because you live in Florida, we have no metal, no quality stone in our area, so the only way they could make their technology was out of what is given to you locally. Now, there was some trade for stone from the West Coast, which would be agatized coral. It's pretty stuff. It's kind of translucent, and it's close to chert. It's similar to flint. So you could get that to make spear points and things like, any kind of cutters. But most of their, I have that, I had it out, didn't I? Right in front of me. Buzukon whelk that we were talking about. This is the basis of 90% of their tools. So one more reason I say, please come up to the display at the Sam's house. The Buzukon whelk, and we can pass this around so everybody, you know this, but it is strong enough, you will use only the base, the point, not the crown, because that's too thin. And so you could shape it into cutters, chisels, hammers, and they're amazingly resilient. And I've got a bunch of broken pieces and debitage up there. You can look at the real thing, and then you can see how we can tell that was a tool and not just a shell we found. Wood, cordage, bone. I want to show you, this is kind of cool. Pass this around. This is a remake, a reproduction, and it's very accurate in size, weight, of burial goods that were buried with one of the children at the Wendover site, an 11-year-old. And what touched me about this was, this is the survival kit. The father sent his child to the next world with a complete starter kit. This is what you need to make all your basic tools and weapons. And this is it, and this we have, it's just kind of neat. It kind of touched me. So pass that along, and that'll come around, and so it's all made out of bone or antler. All right, what am I doing? Okay. I've got a blast, yeah. Spiritual beliefs. We're gonna be blasting through because I want to get to that end part. We're having too much fun. You guys are so well behaved. I want heckling. We only have inferences as to what were their spiritual beliefs. We don't know. But one of the few places in Florida, out of southwest Florida, the Calusa, Father Juan Rogel chronicled the Calusa, and he said that they believed they had three souls: the pupil of the eye, your shadow, and your reflection. And when you died, the shadow and the reflection, as the lesser souls, escaped and went to a lesser animal. And when that lesser animal died, they went to a still lesser animal. And they continued until they went into nothingness. But the pupil of the eye, wherever the body was, they felt the soul stayed with the physical remains. And they did visit their dead, their burial sites, to try to commune with the dead and find out things about the future, what they could tell them about the world that the living couldn't see. There was a Ais ceremony in 1696 witnessed by Jonathan Dickinson, and it was a lot of dog howling and rattling shakes and stomping around, and have no idea. He didn't even ask what it meant. It just happened of the entrance of the moon into its first quarter. Other than that, have no idea. Next one. Like a bathtub with a stopper that's not working. Like a bathtub that's full with a stopper that's not working. It's leaking slowly. 1500s, 1513, Ponce de Leon visits Florida. The fuse is lit. The Indians are going to go away, but they go away for reasons you didn't expect. All right, go to the next one. Here is the key thing to understanding what happened to Florida and what happened to Florida Indians. And this was like my no-duh moment. And as I'm going back, I'm like, why did they care about the Florida Indians? They had no resources. They were cannibals. And Florida is a miserable place pre-air conditioning. So why? And I mean, you ask yourself, why? Well, here's why. The gold and silver from Colombia, Central America, all of these other Caribbean islands, all Mexico, all the mines, each year was gathered and taken to Havana. They gathered together. Remember, this is the age of piracy and privateers. They would gather all of this together in an armada, and then, guess what time of year? The worst time of year to sell a boat. That's right, hurricane season. It's September. It's time to take it all back to Spain, leading to shipwrecks up and down the east coast of Florida. But to get back to Europe, you have to deal with the Gulf Stream that goes around Florida. There's an interesting line from Escalante Fontaneda, and this one crystallized exactly why Florida, and this is in the 1500s. As part of a letter to the King of Spain, and he was captured as part of a shipwreck and then was able to be repatriated later. Somehow he survived the process, because men normally didn't survive the process. He said, "Its, Florida, subjugation is befitting His Majesty for the security of his armadas." There it is. All gold, silver, trade, everything that's going back to Spain has to sail right by Florida. Everything has to sail right by Florida. Which means whoever controls it, the British, the French, whoever, you better control Florida. And that is why Spain put so much effort into Florida and said, we have to be friends with the enemy, or friends with the Indians, or we have to control them somehow. So that's why this was going on. Okay, we'll go to the next one. Now, did the Indians like the Spaniards or anybody else from Europe? Well, let's look at the Spain's track record. The guy with the telescope means they were just exploring. They didn't really do anything. Ponce de Leon, 1513. Then, oh my goodness, they find out Florida's chock full of Indians. They're dying off in the Caribbean where they run plantations. I need more Indians. So guess where they go? They go to Florida. You see slave raids, so you see feet with chains on them. That word gets out amongst the Florida Indians. These outsiders, they're bad news. And they already didn't like outsiders, period. But this makes it even worse. Francisco de Cordoba, 1517, his reaction or his reception was so poor that he left with 12 arrows stuck in him. That's just amazing. 12. Pineda, not successful. Juan Ponce de Leon, he dies as a result of his second visit to Florida. He got shot in the leg with a fishbone-tipped arrow and died from the infection a few weeks later. Another slavery raid, 1521. Panfilo Narvaez, completely wiped out. De Soto, everybody knows what a disaster that was. He did crazy stuff like he cut an old lady's nose off because they spited him and wouldn't do what he asked. Cut her nose off in front of the village. Guess what? The reaction was not good. And they resisted him everywhere thereafter. It's things like that when you find out and you go, ooh, that's terrible. And he sicked attack dogs on killing people. Another one, Luis Cancer, his did not work. Another failed one. And then finally, 1565, the first one that takes, Pedro Menendez de Aviles, who establishes St. Augustine. Next one. No fort or mission was ever successfully established in Ais territory. In 1565, Pedro Menendez was very quickly trying to do controls of Florida. He got the St. Augustine area settled down a bit. He messed with the Guale to the north. He goes, I got to get those guys to the south. He goes down Ais territory. He literally takes a bunch of guys out and said, establish a fort. See you later. Left them. They ran away screaming and hijacked a ship a few months later. That's a fact. That was Fort Santa Lucia. No one's ever found it. Nobody knows exactly where it is. They assume it's not too far from Vero Beach. But those guys ran away. They were never supported. They ran away, and the Indians tried to kill them frequently. So, that site abandoned. Nobody ever established in our territory. But they did visit, and most of the visits were relatively friendly because they came well armed, the Spaniards. Next slide. The bath water was leaking out. It was leaking out. The water level's going down, and this is what accelerates it. The missions are established, and we can all up in North Florida. We didn't have any of these missions till much later, and none in our territory. Notice they're all on the St. John's or west. But all these missions up here start putting Europeans in contact with the Indians. And you all know the story of diseases. Smallpox, measles, influenza. They start taking a toll. The Indians got their revenge and sent the milder form of syphilis back. But it wasn't a fair trade. So, but this contact causes something that really just makes everything fall apart. Let's see. I don't catch up, make sure I don't miss anything fun. All right. Next slide. 1595, coastal epidemics, widespread coastal epidemics documented. So the Indian population there is starting to go down. Now, would this be traveling out to other tribes? We can count on it. We can count that the other tribes are also going to get these diseases, not as often, because they're not, mixing it up all the time. But it started. So the Timucua in the north and the Guale into Georgia, their populations begin to tumble. Next slide. Widespread, that's how it's going. Widespread epidemics for 3 years shrink in that whole zone, going all the way over Timucua, Guale, and over to the Appalachia. Appalachia would be here. This area, the numbers are dropping. Then one of the crazier things ever, the Timucuan Revolution or Rebellion of 1656 cripples and just messes up the entire mission system. And it was a stupid communication error, unthoughtful. Governor Robledo in St. Augustine said, we're almost out of food because of the privateers, the pirates, and all the warring. We're not getting the supplies that we need. So I want you to go out to all the Timucua territory and say, we want 75 arroyos of corn. It's like 75 pounds. Well, there's no trucks, there's no roads. So people got to haul this in. But he puts out the edict. Every Indian male will bring 75 arroyos of corn. Strange quirk The chiefs of the tribes, of the cultures, are highly incensed. They don't do that. They go, I'm not doing that. I'm not bringing it. So the other Indians, I'm not doing that. And besides, that's our strategic store, 75 pounds per person. We're in trouble. So they say, we're not going. Governor Robledo messes up, and he goes, this isn't going to happen. He grabs his sergeant major. He says, I want you to go out to every one of those missions, and you make them do it. Well, he killed like 11 chiefs, 11 caciques. 11. Fragments, so the population's already dropping, things are falling apart. Now he's really made them mad. It gets so bad that they end up having to reorganize and move many of those missions that are in this area. And it's so bad that they reach out all the way up to South Carolina, north of the map, and grab Indians from up there and move them into the territory. Doesn't fit, doesn't work. And so that whole system begins to collapse. So that protective layer of missions is now defunct. Go to the next slide. And the end of time, look at that, I might actually make it. My time, I've never done that before. The final acts, okay, like that 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm real creative. What you don't hear about is the repeated attacks on St. Augustine. The English are chasing it. As a matter of fact, specifically it comes King William's War and then Queen Anne's War are attacking, and they're particularly attacking this area up here. The English who are up north do not want the Spaniards there. They want that territory because they need to control the sea lanes. They also want the Indians. They need slave labor. They continue attacking this area till they literally break down all of the missions, and even the Indians all go back into the St. Augustine area into an enclave. It gets so bad, that's why they build the Castillo that is today, which I believe was 1686, 1689 when that was done. Is because the attacks have become so bad, now they need a coquina fort to protect themselves. All right, that's bad. Number 2, slave raids begin late 1600s, early 1700s. They really ramp up 1702. And these slave raids, they come running in. And I'll tell you what the secret was about the slavery. Slavery's bad, but it's what they did was even worse. Queen Anne's War, 1702 to 1704. Specifically, the English have realized if France or England or Spain or whoever it is there, they have allied Indians. They come as a group. If I'm attacking the Spaniards, I got to have the Spanish Indians. So they go after them, and they are going to try to destroy them, chase them out, or take them off into slavery. 1702 to 1704, the Appalachian Nation is destroyed in 2 years. Destroyed. So now what you've done is you've laid bare this entire northern area. And then we jump right into, then the slave raids get going. The plantations are starting in the Carolinas. They need lots of people. The Indians don't last too long because they're not treated very well. And so up to 30,000 slaves were taken, documented by the British. They used Indians to capture other Indians, and the Indians were happy to do it if they were paid. That's one of the uncomfortable truths. But here's the really bad part about the slave raids. You go, okay, they took people. Can't you just go hide in the woods and come back out when they're gone? Sort of. Next slide. The big slave raids, 1704 to 1709, they focus on women and children. And there's a cultural reason that that's done. The men do not work in the fields. Women and children work in the fields. So if I take all the mommies and all the children, what happens? Within one generation, it collapses. And that's literally what happens. So just like a house of cards, it starts coming down all across Florida, leading to their collapse. Were there some Indians left? Sure, not enough to carry on a culture. Some Calusa were left, maybe some Ais, but here's how the very final, the plug gets pulled, bathwater empties. Next slide, please. 1763, finally, France, Spain, England said, enough of this fighting, we're done. Spain goes, we cannot afford to maintain the colony of Florida. England has never stopped the pressure on them, just pushing, pushing, pushing. The Indians are going away, so they don't have the support. to keep their remote colony happening. So they say, all right, we're giving up Florida. It's yours, England. And they invited the surviving Indians, many of which were in refugee camps by St. Augustine, come with us, we'll take you to Cuba. Well, that was well-meaning, but it didn't work out well. So they go to Cuba, and they disappear into the diaspora forever. There was only one woman beyond one generation, Calusa woman, that they actually found in church records had survived to the next generation. Everybody else disappeared. So that's the end of time. So it was disease and slave raids and war and the stress and being chased around. That's what led to the end of the Indians. I think that's the last one. No, we're not using those. So, yeah, I have extra, but I never have time. So I'm now 3 minutes over, so I have a perfect record. I've never made it on time, a single time. Final question. If you want to see the physical display, because it's 3 tables long, we're up at the screened-in pavilion at Sam's house. Take the shuttle up, and I will be up there as quickly as I can get back there. And I've already got people manning that, so thank you so much. I had a lot of fun. Boy, I had to talk fast. Thank you for coming. Thank you for coming. Never leave the husband unsupervised. This is what happened. It's complex, and each time I read it, there's new layers to the onion. It never stops, and I find this line and that line